Welcome to Tail Learn Code. Here there will be tales about software development, learning from each other, code to build solutions. And now your host, Chad Green.
All right, good evening, everybody. All right, so we're running just a moment behind. I don't have Andrew Duthie on the call just yet. We're actually going to start that up. So we'll be doing this live on while we do this. Let me switch to this screen. There we go. And let me get the call started with Andrew. All right. There we go. Hey, Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Great. All right, we're actually live on Twitch now, but no one sees you yet. So I just got to make a setting change here. Go. And resize you so you don't take over the whole screen. Awesome. There we go. I'll lock it back. Cool. All right. So as I was explaining, we were running just a couple minutes behind, giving Andrew a moment to get online. I'm assuming you were just wrapping up your day at work. I'm probably guessing.
Yeah, that and just stop turning off the audio. Sorry about that. Yeah, just trying to wrap up a few things.
Yeah.
Being the end of the day, actually it was a day of video recording, so definitely right in line with doing some streaming.
Right. So what kind of videos were you working on today?
So my teams, I work on the advocacy team here at OutSystems, and one of the things that we're doing is collaborating with our technical knowledge team who does our documentation to help them improve documentation that users have given feedback that say, this documentation could use some help, occasionally by putting together samples or video demo, like video how-tos, things like that, as well as another one of our teams is focused on helping people who are learning about OutSystems, people who might be adopting it, kind of see very short demos of how to do certain things. So like one that I did today was how to use JavaScript inside of an OutSystems application. So OutSystems is a low-code environment. So a lot of people think low-code and it's like, oh, that just means I can't do stuff. And it's like, no, you can actually use it as much JavaScript as you want. You probably shouldn't use a lot of JavaScript, but you can.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just, I get to have fun making different technologies work together. So that's one of the things I love about the job.
So, we kind of jumped into how I usually start the question, tell me about what you do and everything. But, you've been a dev advocate for quite some time. For different companies and such.
Yep.
But, talk about that. I don't think everyone understands what exactly that means. So what does that mean?
So, easy way to say it is, I've always described it as I'm a teacher, right? So I spent about 10 years at Microsoft as a developer evangelist there, and later they called it, so it was developer evangelist, then it was technical evangelist, but they used the term evangelist, which evangelist as a job title sometimes throws people for a loop because they associate it with religion, which in some ways, right, the title evangelist is like sharing the good news. So instead of sharing good news about religion, it's sharing the good news about a particular technology. And that title actually came out of the original technology evangelist, Guy Kawasaki, who worked for Apple back in the day. So he kind of originated that term. It got adopted throughout the industry. And now I think that particular term has faded away in favor of developer advocate or developer relations. So you'll hear dev advocate or devrel. One way or the other, it's those of us who do that role are really focused on how do we help our customers or developers who are using the technologies that we represent use these technologies more effectively, And also another important aspect is how do we take the feedback that we receive from the developers that we interact with back to the product teams and get them to listen and pay attention to it, right? Because the reality is there is no development platform that is perfect out of the box, right? It just doesn't exist. And it is often a constant wherever you go and whatever you do that product teams tend to resist feedback sometimes. You know, they embrace feedback, like they want to hear the feedback, but I think it's kind of in the nature of having been someone who builds something that there's a little resistance to hearing you know, sometimes the way nobody likes to have their baby called ugly, right? You know, so part of our job is to manage the diplomatic aspects of that, right? We have to diplomatically call the baby ugly and make sure that we advocate for the changes that are necessary to make the baby prettier. I'm probably straining this analogy substantially.
Oh no, well, so funny thing. So Matt Groves is on the chat, and he was like true that, you know, talking about, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of kind of being willing to tell unpleasant truths, even when it hurts people's feelings. And it's not like I go around hurting product people's feelings, right? That's an exaggerated version of it. But it's okay, we've heard this, and if that feedback doesn't receive enough, isn't taken sufficiently seriously, then we have to push harder, right? That's kind of part of what I view my role being, is being the voice of the customer to product, and also being a teacher about the product that I'm representing, which in this case is the OutSystems low-code platform.
So I mean,
I hope that clarifies it.
Oh yeah, no, I think that does help people. So I mean, so tell us about, you know, OutSystems. So you talked about it's low code, but low code to do what?
So it's really a platform for building mobile and web applications faster, right? The whole idea behind low code itself is it's an abstraction, right? If you go above and beyond, you know, when we think about kind of the evolution of the coding industry or the developer industry, we started off with what machines speak, which is binary. Nobody's flipping bits anymore, right? But there were machines back in the day and within my lifetime where you toggled switches to set registers, and you did that painstakingly one at a time, right? There are punch cards that represented code. There were, you know, assembly language, right? You don't see many people using assembler anymore because it's not efficient at all. I remember back in the day, this is probably early 90s, being super impressed with some of the folks who would make what they called demos at the time, which were assembly language, music, and graphics demo programs. And the goal was to fit as much music and as kind of mind-blowing graphics into as tiny a package as possible. And it was just a single executable that you could just double click and run, right? Very, very impressive stuff. The people who did that were geniuses. Did I want to learn to write assembly so I could do that? No, it made my head hurt, right? You know, you go up the ladder again, you're going to like C and C++, right? Every level we're giving up some control, right? We're allowing somebody else to make some of the decisions about how these things actually work at the lower levels in favor of something that's easier for us to read, easier for us to use, right? You go up again, you're talking, you know, Visual Basic, C#. I mean, Visual Basic is really where I cut my teeth, right? It was my entry into professional programming. And anybody who shudders at the idea of professional and VB put together, just get over yourself. Okay?
Right, exactly.
And then, you know, what low code does is kind of takes it the next logical level. So low code, particularly in the OutSystems parlance, is a focus on visual metaphors, right? So I can use visual flows instead of line after line of logic. One of the upsides of that, aside from the fact that it's faster to construct it the first time, is that I am one of those people who can write, you know, a a module with several, with several functions in it, come back to it 6 months later and look at it and be like, what was I doing here? And it takes me a while to kind of get my head back in the context of what I was doing so that I can edit what I wrote originally without introducing bugs or causing, major problems down the road. With a visual metaphor, I can look at the flow and much more quickly intuit what's going on in that flow, right? So it's kind of another abstraction layer on top of kind of what we've done in the past. Would be the way I'd put it.
So sure enough, I probably just screwed you all up because I just shared my screen, but one so you can see the chat window as it goes. But you're actually getting roasted. You don't see him at the moment because I started a new chat window. But so you got Kevin Griffin talking about in your day it was the abacus, and it basically equated to Visual Abacus.
So Kevin and I have a little history. So he's most welcome to roast me if he likes. Right.
But, of course, I know the feeling of saying Visual Abacus because I was on there from the beginning. Now why is Kevin calling me out now? I'm not sure. But I was using VB. I use VB from VB1. So wow. I remember. Well, Kevin, you put it on chat. What do you want? If you put it in the chat, it's all fair game.
Yeah, exactly.
This is kind of the fun part about doing this a little bit later in the day because now we get some people who are also not working who can also join in.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly. Can't stand the heat. Get out of chat.
Yeah, exactly.
But cool. So sure enough, how's the pandemic been treating you?
Well, so I have pretty much for most of the last 15 or so years have worked from home. So in terms of my working situation, it means a little bit less travel than I would typically do. But in terms of my day-to-day, not really a whole lot different. My wife and I homeschool, so our kids are home anyway. The major difference there is they would typically have at least a couple of days a week co-ops where they would be taking classes out of the home, which during the pandemic, obviously, most of that became online. So definitely even with us being accustomed to being around each other as a family most of the time, still a few challenges there, right? And I mentioned one of the things that I do is create content, record videos and such. Trying to find time to do that when one or the other of the boys isn't practicing piano or being rowdy or something like that gets a little more challenging. So actually, one of the things that my wife and I had been working on is trying to figure out a good space in the house for me to have an office where it was a little quieter. So for a while, I was actually in my basement and had put up one unfinished basement, had put up one wall between me and the furnace because when the AC ran, it was just way too loud to even think about recording. And that was just not a great situation. So my wife generously gave up her walk-in closet, which is where I am right now. I put up some studio foam on the walls and brought my desk in with my sit-stand desk that my monitor sits on and my boom mic. So now I got the ability to close two doors between me and the rest of the family. So that makes it a little bit easier to actually record, even if folks are around, and as long as they're not, completely bringing down the house with the rowdiness. I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, both boys. So right. There is the very real chance that between the two of them, they might tear the house down at some point.
I have a daughter, but I mean, I have a daughter who's in grad school. She's been home since late March. And it's funny. You would have thought, okay, well, 23-year-old daughter, no big deal. Well, the problem is she gets the dog all riled up throughout the day. Right. Because he's not used to anyone being home during the day. He's used to just being me and him. So that's where my life has been different. It's just having more people at the house during the day. Well, that, and I've joked with about several times that, early on while she was still in class, she was getting on me because I was listening to music too loudly. And I'm
Dad, turn your music down.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I'm sitting here like, well, this is my house. You
don't expect to have the teenage daughter be the one, or she might be in her 20s now, but yeah, you don't expect your youngster, your child, by comparison to you, being the one to scold you about loud music. That's not.
And no, Matthew is definitely not Kenny G.
Oh, that hurts my ears just to think about.
Now, admittedly, I do listen to a wide range of music, but I don't think I've listened to Kenny G in I don't know how long.
And strangely enough, I've actually got one of those melodies going through my head now. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Well, it's not hard. It's not hard to do, right? Kenny Loggins. Now that works, right?
There you go.
Oh God! Now, Chad is definitely active tonight. Oh, yeah. I guess we're gonna name every Kenny singer out there.
Kenny Loggins? No, Kenny Rogers.
Well, we had Kenny Loggins, now Kenny Rogers.
Kenny Rogers actually passed away. You believe that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So the funny thing about Kenny Rogers, my wife is Filipino, and actually Filipinos love Kenny Rogers. And to include, if you remember, he had his restaurant. Well, this restaurant is still around in the Philippines.
Wow.
And so. So when he passed away, that was actually kind of a semi big deal. And my wife, she was not a Kenny Rogers fan per se. But she's that was sad that he passed away. But who doesn't love a Kenny Rogers? Well, the IRS didn't love him.
Oh, ouch. The IRS must have a thing for country singers. I mean, because wasn't Willie got in trouble with the IRS too?
Yeah, I think so. You know what? I might be mixing up Kenny Rogers and Willie.
Could be. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so getting back, so that's cool. So sure enough, another question that wasn't there, and this is kind of an interesting. In your company, who does the developer relations report to?
So as of right now, we're actually part of we call it kind of a tiger team called Project X. So it's basically an effort in which we brought a bunch of different multidisciplinary teams together to solve a number of issues that we wanted to improve for our customers. So one of those issues, and the initial kind of reason for that tiger team being pulled together, was to try to reduce the time that it takes from a customer first signing on as a customer to when they first achieve value with the platform. And part of that is really kind of we actually came together in Prensa Nova in Lisbon, in Portugal. Got the entire team together in this small town in the middle of Portugal with not much else to do, so we couldn't get distracted, and sat us down in a conference room, and we basically did brainstorming about, okay, what are the steps that have to happen before a customer can launch their first application on our platform, right? We looked at training, right? We looked at documentation. We looked at installing the platform, right? Some people install the platform on premises. Some people go through our cloud. Really kind of trying to identify all of the different moving parts that have to happen between signing that contract and when someone actually can land their first application in production. And then not only analyzing what are all the moving parts, but which parts have the most impact, right? Which ones take the longest time-wise? Which ones cause the most friction, right? So kind of doing multidimensional analysis to try to really tease out which pieces would have the most impact for us to work on. And then once we did that work, deciding, okay, we're going to tackle this, and this piece. These teams are going to be the ones who are going to do that work, right? And my team in particular, given, again, right, I said, what's my job? I'm a teacher, right? So part of my job was to help create content that could help people overcome knowledge gaps or any places that were identified as being particularly tricky or challenging to kind of make that transition from either not being a coder to building applications with our platform, or from being a developer who's used to writing lines of code to being a developer who can understand how to build an application with low code. Right. So those are the kinds of things where, where building that multidisciplinary team made a lot of sense. And then, as we kind of made progress on that goal, or what we call, North Star, we then kind of spread out and looked to see, okay, what else can this team do to impact things in a positive way for our customers? So that's kind of the background of how, and then the person who runs our team also runs the product team. So there's some good communication that happens between our multidisciplinary team and the product group, so that, it's kind of a nice, I don't know how to describe it, but we have a good relationship with the product team. We also work closely, the advocacy team, with the community team. So advocacy is kind of a pivot on dealing with the broader community. The community team really focuses on things like forums, the community portion of our website, as well as we have an MVP program. So we have a number of folks who are kind of the I hesitate to use the word rock star, but who are particularly active and who are rewarded with the MVP status, much like Microsoft does. Who help frequently in the forums, who write articles and blog posts, and the community team kind of owns that relationship, if you will, but the advocacy team also interacts with those folks as well. So
good. I mean, that sounds like you all have got it really set up nicely. I mean, it's, sure, you see dev advocates in different companies. I mean, some are working for a community team and it's actually separate. Some are working for the product teams.
Yeah.
Honestly, a lot of them working for the sales teams, which makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, the developer relations role is also different from organization to organization.
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Right? So there are a lot of organizations where the developer relations team is also involved in writing APIs and writing actual code that developers use. There are places where it really is more of a marketing team. I mean, I don't know what the role looks like at Microsoft today, but certainly when I was with Microsoft as an evangelist, we ultimately kind of rolled up to the marketing organization. It's one of the things I actually like about evangelism and advocacy in general is that it's a role that typically isn't associated with revenue, and therefore you kind of avoid some of the pressures to deliver numbers and behaviors that kind of go along with that, if you will.
That's right. I mean, I like back in the good old days of Microsoft evangelists, because you would talk to them and they were the first one to tell you, look, I'm not a sales guy. If you want to know sales numbers, here, I'll get you in contact with the sales guy. Of course, now, I mean, they still have developer advocates, but it's completely different than it was just like 5 years ago.
Right.
They're definitely more product focused, which is good. I mean, so you have like you have the Azure team, where they have they have their team. Same thing with the DevOps team. They've got a special team that goes out.
Right. And I think there's a role for, or there's a place for all of those kinds of roles. I actually came to OutSystems as a solution architect, so I was on the technical sales side of things. And I think it was actually really good for me to spend some time doing that. I mean, I actually enjoyed it more than I expected I would. But I'd always been in my career really resistant to the idea of carrying a quota. And the nice thing about a technical sales role like solution architect is you carry a quota, but you're not purely responsible for it. So it's kind of an adjacent thing. It's not one of those where if you have a bad quarter, you don't pay the mortgage, right? It's one of those, if you do really well, you get a nice bonus. If you don't do really well, you still do okay. So it's kind of a low risk kind of way of understanding what that what that role looks like. And I do think it, I would actually go so far as to say that people who haven't been in that position of carrying a quota, it's not a bad idea to actually try that for a little while, because I think that you can gain some insight in terms of what the truth is of how people are driven when they're responsible for a quota. And I know that working more closely with account managers and the kind of quote unquote real salespeople, it gave me insights that I didn't have before, right? So before I had stereotypes and assumptions about what salespeople were like, and honestly, there were a few stereotypes that were occasionally confirmed. But it is really important to put a human face on on your preconceptions about different roles. Mm-hmm. So I was really happy that I had the opportunity to do the solution architect role. But when the opportunity came to join the advocacy team, that just really felt like a much more natural fit for me personally. And so I kind of jumped at that chance.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. So how did you get started in tech?
Oh, wow. So
I mean, obviously Visual Abacus, right?
I get to feel really old now. So I actually did my first programming on a Commodore PET computer back, it must have been early 80s, I would guess, probably. And so my school at the time had a paper printer mainframe hookup on which I played Oregon Trail as much as I could possibly do. They then later obtained a Commodore PET, and I at one point was able to take it home for a week. And I had mentioned this to my mom and said, I'd like to bring a pet home for the week. And she said, oh, really? What kind of pet? And I said, no, it's a computer. And she was very puzzled by this, but it was the kind of thing where writing a program usually meant, at the time it meant copying a program for most of us. At least at my age, I wasn't prepared to write much of anything, but it meant laboriously copying line by line from a paper magazine a program that would do something that you wanted to do. So I showed my mom how I could make an ASCII rocket ship fly up the screen using BASIC on a Commodore PET. Mm-hmm. I then later actually translated that skill to being able to write small programs for a small teacher shop that had a display Commodore PET, but really nothing interesting to do with it. And I would trade my programming skills for little tchotchkes like pencil toppers and things like that. So you could say at the age of 11 years old or so, I was a professional programmer. And at one point I had a Commodore 64 of my own. I didn't get deeply into programming at that point. I really was more into playing games on it, Lunar Lander and such. And it wasn't really till the 90s that I got back into computers from the programming side of things. I had gone in college. I was a music and theater major and left college, and I spent about 6 years doing technical theater. So building scenery, hanging lights, anything that you can think of to do with the technical side of professional theater. I was all over the Washington, D.C. area, various theaters. The problem with that is it is a very, very low-paying industry, and D.C. is not a cheap place to live. So those two things came into conflict for me, and I was looking for something that I could do to do something a little more lucrative. And a relative suggested, well, you already know enough about computers from our conversation to kind of get into the industry. You just need a way to get your foot in the door. And he suggested certification. So I went out and got a few certifications, bumped into, you might have met Jeff Snowman. You familiar with him?
Yeah.
So Jeff and I worked at Microsoft later in my career, but Jeff was doing a Dev Days event in the DC area. I went because I wanted to learn about programming, and I also wanted to kind of get some ideas about how to kickstart my career. and chatted with him, and he said, well, if you want to get started as a programmer, you probably want to go to work for a Microsoft solution provider. And he said, well, why don't you send me a resume? I said, okay, I don't have any experience. I don't know what I'm doing, but why not? So I sent him a resume. And 3 weeks later, took my Visual Basic certification. And apparently the folks at Spectrum Technology Group, where he worked at the time, looked at that and said, well, it seems like he's at least, eager and he's kind of a go-getter. So let's bring him for an interview. They hired me. I got lucky enough to work with two of the top programmers in the company on a project that was at the time very cutting edge. And anyway, long story short, I really was fortunate to have kind of hit the industry right when kind of the internet development trend was trending up. So I landed kind of in a space of working in classic ASP at the time when that was just starting to take off. Back in the days when you could know the entire API of ASP.dll by heart, which definitely makes me feel old. But really working on a challenging project with developers who were patient and kind and, taught me as I worked, right? And kind of talked me down from the multi-thousand line procedures where you were doing everything in a button click handler to code that was a little more robust and well structured, and then just kind of went from there. And I was also fortunate to get into the user group scene. So I started, attending local user groups in DC. One of the two developers I was working with was a big fan of user groups. And so he invited me to go along to a couple. And kind of once I started going, I was like, oh, this is great. I get to learn, I get to meet people. And, it just really, which is odd now because I think of myself now as kind of a semi-introvert. Like I can go into extrovert mode temporarily, but I do I need to be alone to recharge. So maybe I've flipped on that at some point. But having gotten into the user group scene, that then led me into kind of speaking, and then I was interested in writing. And again, the developer that I worked with had a connection with somebody who had his own publishing company, but also acted as a book agent, who got me connected with the right people at Microsoft. And I ended up writing a book when I had originally contacted the guy just to write a chapter. I was looking at, you remember the Rocks books, right? That had 20 different authors, and they were 5,000 pages long. And I thought, well, that'd be a perfect way to get started, right? Just write a chapter in a book like that. And so I'd approached this guy and said, do you have any projects that, that I could write a chapter for? Because I was less than a year into the industry at this point. I didn't think I could write a book, but I figured I could probably pull off a chapter. He said, no, but why don't we put together a proposal? So I said, okay, I mean, what's the worst thing? I learned how to write a book proposal, right? That's the worst case, right? No, it turns out the worst case is somebody says yes, and then you freak out because you have to write a book. So and oddly enough, it never occurred to me to say, I can't write a book. It was like, they said yes, now I have to do it. So, okay. So anyway, and from there, that sort of led to more speaking and more working in the disciplines that kind of led me into evangelism and developer relations. And eventually, another Microsoft Dev Days came up, but this time I was speaking, and at that time developer evangelist who was working for Microsoft in Mid-Atlantic approached me afterwards and said, would you be interested in being a developer evangelist at Microsoft? And at the time, it's like, okay. So basically what you're saying, because we talked about like what that meant. So basically what you're saying is you want me to do some of the things that I'm doing for free now, but get paid for it. I twist my arm.
Yeah.
So, and it wasn't quite that simple. It took a good bit of time and kind of some maneuvering, because there was a lot of changes in what was at the time developer and platform evangelism was the organization within Microsoft that the developer evangelists reported into. There was a lot of changes in terms of reporting structure and things like that kind of delayed the process and made me very anxious along the way. But eventually, ended up getting hired and spent the longest time that I've spent at any company, almost 10 years at Microsoft, because it was literally one of the best jobs I'd ever had in my life. Being able to work with a lot of really cool developers to help support community. There were folks. So the Code Camp trend was happening right around then. It was actually one of my peers at Microsoft, Tom Robbins, who worked to help organize one of the first Code Camps up in New England, and then the model kind of spread from there. But getting to work with a lot of cool folks throughout the Mid-Atlantic community, Kevin Griffin being one of them, but folks like Andy Leonard, Kevin. Of course, now I'm blanking on names, which is a little embarrassing. But a ton of folks, like I worked with a ton of great folks in Kevin Hazard being another one. Ton of great folks in the Richmond community. Lots of great folks in Northern Virginia, Baltimore, Columbia. Randy Hayes at the Columbia User Group. I mean, just a ton of really great people who shared a passion for technology. And then being in the position to help support those folks, to speak to their groups periodically, share technology information. There's a joy to being able to be their voice within a company, right? But to also share interesting and fun things. And one of the things that I actually love about this, my manager now, Stacy Levine, he recruited me into the developer advocacy group. And one of the things that I love about being in this role here is that it's not just here, show people how to use this specific tool. It's let's get creative and have fun with it. So among the projects I've done working with Stacy, we actually worked with, we have an internal demo team that builds really polished, beautiful demos. Because like Stacy and I, we're not UI people. So you don't want us writing the user interface for things. But they helped us build an application where I worked on the guts, they worked on the UI, but we built an application to control a self-balancing Bluetooth-controlled robot, right? For the fun of it, but also to make the point that you don't have to have just Battleship gray UIs, right? You can use this technology platform and build UIs that you might not have even been able to imagine, like joystick UI and just, a really beautiful looking controller for this robot. And then, we go to trade shows and kind of show it off because it's just fun. We also built an internet enabled AI controlled candy dispenser. So basically,
last time I saw you were doing a presentation on that.
Yeah. So he sent me a stepper motor and a little handle and said, can you design an adapter that would go from this to this? And I said, sure. And that took me about 10 minutes in, I think I was using Fusion 360. Took me about 10 minutes to design something, print out a prototype in another 20 minutes, test it, then tweak and rinse and repeat. Like less than a day to actually get that part kind of put together to a point where I was fairly comfortable with it. And then I said, but I can't really guarantee that this is going to work without the actual dispenser because there's friction. There's, I don't know if it's enough torque. I don't know what the voltage, I really kind of need to. And he said, okay, buy the dispenser, put it together. So I ended up then, custom designing and 3D printing brackets to hold the stepper motor and, cases for the electronics and deciding on which board to use. And, those are things that I also got to do a lot of that stuff with microcontrollers and such back in the .NET Gadgeteer days, which rest in peace, .NET Gadgeteer. It was a great platform.
Oh, yeah.
So sad that went away. I still have a bunch of Gadgeteer gear though. But again, it's this, you can certainly teach and be successful in teaching people by staying within the box of the IDE. But I think it's more effective and more fun. And also, I think I'm more effective as a teacher if I'm doing something that's also fun for me.
Oh, definitely.
Right? Because I can be passionate about it. If it's just, stay within the bounds of the product and just read the product script and, and put it up on YouTube, I think I'd be out of here because that's not a lot of fun. If I can give it my style, if I can, have the occasional foray into weirdness, which without the occasional foray into weirdness, I wouldn't have the skills that I need to do the workshop that I'm going to do for the conference, right? So it's sort of, I think it's good in a number of ways.
Well, so sure enough, I mean, let's talk about what you're going to be talking about at Code PaLOusa, which you had one of the hardest ones to move to online. So it's funny. So for those who haven't heard this so far, I mean, not just your talk, but so when we were doing Call for Speakers in March, and I mean, when we started the Call for Speakers, this was just something over in Asia, probably not going to affect us. Quickly went to, oh my goodness, this is going to affect us. To oh my goodness, where we're going to do this. But as we were picking, number one, we picked workshops right away. That's always the first thing we pick. And when we picked workshops, we were still expecting we could have an in-person event. Mm-hmm. And then by the time we were done with everything, and it took a little bit longer because we were trying to figure out what we're doing with our conference, I made a decision. I was like, well, I'm just going to leave everyone who picked, even though I know some of these workshops are going to be pretty hard to do online. And so you're going to be talking about a crash course on 3D printing. And I know you sent me an email like, I'm not sure how to do this. And I remember, like, well, just think about it. No rush. Right? We got a couple months till Code PaLOusa. And so I'm curious. So, talk about this talk. What should people get out of this talk? This workshop, I should say.
Well, so I think part of what I'm going to try to do is distill into a half day a lot of the things that I had to learn over the course of time and experience in terms of selecting printers. And it's really the focus for me is going to be kind of at the hobby level. I'm not qualified to talk about professional grade, 3D printing, but there's a lot of pieces that I've touched on over the past, 2 years or so that I've been working with printers. I started off with a really cheap, probably $125 Delta printer that was a ton of fun, not super accurate, but also really interesting to watch print. For those who don't know, printers come in two basic styles at this price level. You've got Cartesian, which is your basic XYZ, and you've got Delta, which is almost a spider-looking thing where the print head is on a set of 3 arms. It's kind of triangular in shape, hence the Delta. But the Deltas, they're fun to watch. They're really interesting printers. But the Delta that I got was also had a really tiny build plate, so it really limited what I could actually.
Welcome to Tail Learn Code.
That scared me to death.
I was like, what was that?
We got a new follower, so that was thank you, Topo Giveaway for following. But that startled me. Plus, on top of it, I have new alert sounds, so that was the first time I've heard it live.
Okay. Yeah, so I had gotten this Delta printer, and it did fine for the basic learning. Did a little bit of tweaking on it, printed some parts to help it, run quieter and better. It was quite a noisy printer. But got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm outgrowing this. I need something new. And had been reading about this printer called the Ender 3, which was at the time still fairly new, but also really affordable. So I found one with a coupon on eBay for about $185, which is still, when you think about, I had looked into 3D printing probably 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years before this. It was a hobby that I really wanted to get into. And you had kind of the really low end printers, which are still in the $300, $400, $500 range, were mostly laser cut wood, strings and springs, they were really kind of janky.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard at anything below $1,000 to get anything worth quality, and I couldn't bring myself to spend that kind of money on something that seemed like it was really not quite there yet. And then you'd go kind of up into the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 range where you were getting the maker bots and, things like that were in enclosures, and they were all metal, and, they look great, but I've bought cars for less than that.
Right.
Right. So I just really couldn't bring myself to spend that kind of money. I really thought about it a couple of times, and every time I pulled myself away from the precipice of clicking the buy button, because I just couldn't see doing that. So $185 later, a few weeks worth, or I don't know how long, a couple of days worth of shipping, the box arrives. Thankfully, lots of information online in terms of assembling, because this was not a fully assembled printer. So mostly assembled, not a full kit. Put it together and start printing. And here's where we're kind of at this low end. A lot depends on if you found the right video to help you put the printer together the correct way, because you can do stuff that will make it misaligned and make your life a living hell, because you'll never get the bed quite level or flat. Lot depends on if you got a flat bed to begin with, right? So one of the downsides of cheaper printers is that there's more room for variability in the experience. I was fairly fortunate in that I was able to get my printer working well fairly quickly. One of the things that is a common joke in the 3D printing world is that you buy a 3D printer to print parts for your 3D printer, right? And almost without fail, unless you're buying something at that high end where it's several $1,000s and you're afraid to touch it because if you break it and you void the warranty, you've blown a lot of money. One of the beauties of a sub $200 printer is I don't fear tweaking and modding it in the slightest, right? So my original Ender 3 is still rocking and rolling. I put a glass bed on it. I've actually replaced the control board on it with a board that has silent stepper motor drivers. So one of the things that's characteristic about cheaper printers or older printers is you get the noise from the stepper motors going wee 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 wee. It's if you have to listen to it for very long, it gets annoying quickly, especially to spouses. So for like $35, you can buy a board that not only has these silent stepper motor drivers, it has more memory, it has a faster processor, so you can kind of step up your game. So I would venture to guess that my sub $200 Ender 3, after all of the parts and labor that I've put into it, is probably more like $1,000 printer in terms of what I've invested into it, money and time wise. But it's got LEDs that indicate how the hot end is warming up. I've got a webcam and a Raspberry Pi hooked up to it so I can control it remotely and remotely view and see if the print is turned to spaghetti or if it's still sticking to the bed. There's a lot that you can do, and the process of doing those modifications and tweaks is a really fantastic learning process, right? So I've by having cheaper printers that I've modded, I've learned a whole lot more about 3D printing than I ever would have if I'd spent $5,000 on a box where I just press go and it prints. So I'm very happy that I went the route that I went. There's also something to be said for kind of a middle ground. So there's a company out of the Czech Republic called Prusa, named for Joseph Prusa, who founded the company, that makes printers that are the same style. In fact, his open source design is used by a lot of these clone printers, but they're in the for a smaller one in the range of $400 or so. His larger one, $800 to $1,000, depending on whether you get a pre-assembled or a kit version. And everything that I have heard says that those are really good out of the box, right? That if you want to just be able to just, slice a file and press print. They do a great job of that. It's not a printer that most people spend a lot of time modding. So there's a lot that depends on what your desired experience is. So part of the workshop is really going to kind of be walking through that process of, okay, what is your goal for 3D printing? If what you want is to print stuff, either stuff that you find on Thingiverse, which is a good repository of 3D models, or stuff that you design, then you might go one way, right? But if what you want is a fun hobby, right, that might lead you down the road of go ahead and buy something cheaper with the understanding that it may not be perfect out of the box, but part of what you're committing here is I'm going to spend some of my time to make this better. And in the process, I'm going to learn a whole lot that will make the whole aspect of the hobby a lot more fun. That doesn't mean that I haven't had my moments of frustration when I've wanted to throw a printer onto the floor and stomp it, or, do the Office Space baseball bat with the printer, scene. But for the most part, it's a great fun hobby. And then when you start getting into the design aspect of the hobby, I started off with Tinkercad, which is just a web-based CAD software that's really, really simple to use. And then migrated to Fusion 360, which is one of the things that's great about Fusion 360 is they offer a essentially hobbyist / maker license. So if you're using it for non-commercial purposes for a hobby, you can get a free license, which is terrific because it's a great piece of software. And there's a magic to being able to design a part for a particular purpose and then print that part and having taken something from the virtual world into the real world with practical function and make that work. Some stuff that you print is just toys. So for example, this is a one of the kind of Easter, I think it's called Maui, the Easter Island statues, right? So this is something that I printed on my Ender 3 Pro. So that's my second Ender 3. This is actually printed, I think, with Prussiament PLA, which is Prussia's special filament. Also, another model that they use. This is a actual working nut and bolt. So this actually works and threads all the way on. Again, not a super practical print. I mean, there are things that you could use a fastener like this for, but it's mostly a fidget toy for my desk.
Exactly.
But one of the things that came up with, for example, the candy dispenser, right? So the candy dispenser consisted of a bracket that sat on this food dispenser, an adapter for the stepper motor to the impeller for the food dispenser. And later, after I'd gotten that kind of tweaked and built, I've actually built, I think, 3 or 4 candy dispensers. One actually lives with one of our solution architects who uses it for demos. One went over to Lisbon to live with the team over there. Actually took one with me to Amsterdam for our industry conference last year. So I actually flew to Amsterdam with a candy dispenser. So that was sort of interesting. But the same concepts that went into that actually helped me out when the leader of our youth group at church was looking for, we had a series of talks for our youth group on kind of big questions. And the suggested idea from kind of the literature that the youth group leader had suggested having a question box. And I thought, ooh, I could probably do something fun there. So we actually, my sons helped me build a question box out of 2 stacked IKEA lac tables, which we then lined with tempered hardboard, cut a question mark out of the front of it, and lined that with multicolor LEDs. So we basically had it set up so that when we wanted to activate it, it would make the question mark LEDs blink. And then I mounted a variation of the mechanism for the candy dispenser underneath the top table with a slot, so we could pop a card out with the question for that week. So then I didn't actually build this into the microcontroller, but I had a speaker inside, so I could actually use a mobile application written with OutSystems, of course, to play a fanfare and then activate the mechanism inside the box remotely.
That's
so
cool.
I did all of this over the internet, completely hands-free. And then for the last week, I actually brought in a smoke machine to kick it up even further a notch. So as you can tell, I like building fun stuff. So, but doing that question box meant designing a new bracket and then a rack and pinion mechanism to actually raise the card up and down. So it was a completely different design challenge than distributing candy.
So one of my funner projects that I've done, especially in the last couple of years, I was working for a healthcare company that would do work with physical therapy, and so they would they actually work at factories, and when people come to apply for jobs at these factories, we would test them to make sure so we make sure they get placed in jobs that wouldn't hurt them, right? So knowing, for example, how far can you reach and what type of angle, and what they've been doing for the last several years was they literally had a PVC pipe with a marker. They have a barrier, and you just draw on a whiteboard, and we were automating that whole process. And one of the cool parts was I had to be able to print a box that would hold my because I was using ultrasonic sensors that would detect the distance. So that was a lot of fun. One, because I was playing with Arduino. But two, I was actually printing these custom made boxes on a 3D printer. But at the same rate, also one of the more frustrating things I've done, trying to get that 3D printer aligned and and I thought we went the safe route because we went with like the XYZ printing ones. Right. Because I thought, this way it's all pre-built, everything's ready to go. I spent so much time aligning that thing, and then like every time I print it, I'd have to realign the thing.
Yeah, and the downside at the consumer level, particularly at the lower end of 3D printing, there's a degree of variability that comes in terms of different filaments may have different temperatures that they prefer to print at, right? You may have one filament that wants to print at 200 C. You may have one that prefers 185 C, and depending on which temperature you're printing at, that may affect bed adhesion as well. One of the really hardest things to do for most people, though, is getting that first layer squish right. A lot of times people will just kind of throw up their hands and print on a raft, and I'm not going to tell them no. You don't get the same bottom finish that you would if you were on glass or on a nice textured bed. But I understand, that it's like you can only spend so much of your time leveling the bed before you just say, I'm done, but persisting and actually getting to the point where you understand what's necessary, like what a good first level looks like, definitely makes it a lot easier. And there's a lot of the technologies around things like auto bed leveling have really improved and gotten to the point where they're inexpensive enough and easy enough for consumers, people who are handy, of course, people who are willing to tinker. So for example, my Ender 3 Pro, I added an automatic bed leveling sensor. And I did that in part because I was already using a 3D printed parts fan or parts duct that was made for to mount a specific type of bed leveling, and with the replacement board that I got, having the ability to just kind of plug and play, it's like, I just need to do this and learn how to do it and try it. And the upside of auto bed leveling is it doesn't necessarily make for a perfect first level, but what it does is it means that the printer can accommodate any lack of level in your bed. Once you get it to a certain point, it can tweak as it prints, and then when you print, you're still going through and kind of adjusting the distance from the bed until you get it right. And then once you get it right, it can be right for a good long while. But like that printer, I probably haven't printed on in at least 2 or 3 weeks. So if I were to print something new now, I would probably kind of ride the Z adjustment just to make sure that I got that good first level, and then save that back into the firmware so that it's, kind of good to go for a while. So there's a lot of things that just come with hard experience. And if you don't have someone to help you, if you don't have a community, like I found some really great Facebook groups that were very helpful. There's also lots of great resources on Reddit for 3D printing. And by having those resources available, that kind of helped ease some of that pain. Lots of great YouTube videos that you can find on assembling and tweaking and customizing 3D printers. But all of those things take time to find. And for people who, buy a 3D printer and they just really want it to work and it's not working and they don't know where these resources are, that can be really frustrating. And it's really easy to just kind of throw your hands up in disgust and let the sucker gather dust and be done with it. So my hope is with the workshop that, at a minimum, we'll get people to a point where they know enough to really start to be productively hacking on their printers, right? And getting good results out of their printers, but also so that they know, basic resources of where to find information. Mm-hmm. Right, because I think that's a part of the struggle as well. And then, ideally, if time allows, get into some of the design aspects as well, right? And how you take a 3D design in a given CAD software, turn that into a model that can be sliced for a 3D printer, right? Kind of the software side of it is, you've got these 3D models, you've got software called a slicer that takes a 3D model and essentially makes single layers that your printer can know about, because at the end of the day, a 3D printer is stupid. It's really important for people to understand. A 3D printer has no concept of what it is printing. All it is doing is it's taking an instruction that you've told it, print this layer, move up, print this next layer, move up, print this next layer until it's done, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't know anything more than that. Mm-hmm. And so understanding how the software works that converts that 3D model into the instructions for the printer is really key to getting good results. And I think one of the things that Prusa has done really well, and part of the reason that they're successful, is that they're not just about building the hardware. They also have their own custom slicer software that has built-in profiles that are designed to make it as easy as possible to be successful with their printers. So they know their printers, they know the profiles, and if you're using their filament, they even know their filament. So they're removing a lot of the variables that can really kind of kick people in the butt.
Mm-hmm. No, that sounds like a lot of fun. I think you'll see a lot of people who definitely enjoy that workshop. I will be curious how many will see it originally, how many will watch the recording and ask questions afterwards. But I also could see, because, and if I remember, we scheduled in the afternoon on purpose, so that it could be also for the folks who don't want to know their coding session, want to have a little more fun, and enjoy themselves. One thing, and I know you profess this also, you've got to have fun with technology. It's not just writing CRUD apps all the time.
Yeah. Yep. You gotta have the passion as well as the drudgery.
Mm-hmm.
The drudgery has its place, right? Every app, or most apps do need to have some CRUD operations. You just don't want to spend all of your time doing that part.
So I'm curious. You've been speaking for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your advice to people who are interested in speaking?
Go speak. So I did it the wrong way. I actually, the company that I worked at, where I really kind of cut my teeth, actually had an internal series called Lunch and Learns. And that can be a great way, presenting a topic to your peers internally. It can be, depends on your peers, of course, but that can be a low pressure way of getting started with presenting in front of others. It may be that you'd rather present to strangers, which I can understand as well. User groups are almost always looking for speakers, right? Kevin can attest to this. Kevin ran a meetup group in Hampton Roads for a very long time. He's also still, I think, involved with that group. Lots. I mean, pretty much any, if you're near even a mid-sized town, you probably got user groups or meetups. So you can search meetup.com. You just look for your local user groups. They're a great place to get started. The other thing is local events like code camps, right? Code camps are probably a little less. There are probably a fewer of them than there were at one time, and certainly there aren't very many happening in person these days. But those are also great. Look for community-run events, that are run by volunteers that aren't charging admission. Those are again low-pressure places to start. Kind of exploring, and really just kind of identify something that you're passionate about. Right? Don't speak about something that you don't care about. That's really a bad idea. But find something that kind of excites you or interests you, even if it's something that you're not an expert at yet. You don't have to be an expert to teach. And this is something that was really important. It took me a while to get over this. When I started as a developer evangelist at Microsoft, I really had this sense that I had to know everything about a subject, or else I was going to be caught out as a fraud, right? Standard imposter syndrome. And Kim Matlock, who was at the time my manager at Microsoft, said, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know more than the person that you're teaching, right? And on any given subject, that's likely going to be the case, right? If somebody comes to a talk, particularly if somebody comes to like an intro level talk about some topic, they're not coming to that talk because they're an expert and they want to catch you not being an expert, right? They're coming because they're interested in hearing about that topic and they probably don't know about it. So don't let, I would definitely encourage people who are interested in speaking, don't let your own perceptions about your lack of expertise deter you from being willing to teach what which may not be everything. Get over it, right? Don't be afraid to teach what you know to people who don't know it, right? Because it is a rare joy, or maybe not a rare joy, but it is a joy to look out into the eyes of people you're talking to and see kind of the aha moment, or the kind of, oh, that's cool, right? When you see people kind of the eyes lighting up and they're either really interested in it, or they're really or they're just kind of understanding what you're saying. It's just so much fun, right? And I love getting the chance to present fun stuff, and I'm kind of a I'm kind of a wisecracker. I'm never going to be I'm never going to be a Billy Hollis. Like, Billy is such a funny guy, and I would love to learn how to tell jokes like he does. But just getting a laugh out of an audience is just, it just does my heart good, right? Because not only at that point am I teaching, but I've also brought some light and some humor into somebody's day. And those are things that just, if apart from being a parent and, raising kids, which is obviously a lot more meaningful than any talk that I've given. But in my professional life, those are the things that I think I'll be able to look back on, when I'm retired, if I ever retire, and think, I had a good run. Right? I had the opportunity to touch people, to make them laugh, to make them smile, to teach them things that hopefully, it's certainly my prayer that people that I've taught have gone on to use the skills and the information that I've taught them to benefit themselves and others, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about what technology I represent. It's not about, selling the platform. It's about, okay, if I don't believe that what I'm teaching you is going to benefit you in some way, I don't want to be up here. Right. So certainly hope that, that people get a lot out of the things that I do. I certainly do. So
a great comment in the chat, teach it forward. Right. I mean, And I think most speakers, that's what it really is about, is giving back to the community. And sure enough, I gotta admit, one of the best feelings is one thing when you hear from someone right after a talk of how great that talk was, or they learned something, something they didn't realize. It's even better when they see you at a different time or even a different conference. So earlier this year, I was in DC and I'm speaking, and someone saw me at Tech Bash, talk I was doing, and he actually approached me, and it was someone I've known. I mean, I've met him before, and he said, "Hey, that talk you did in Tech Bash, that was so awesome. I went back to my team, and we were able to implement, because it was on what's it called? Temporal tables, right? So the whole idea of, storing your history of your data. So yeah, we were able to implement that forward, and boy, that just made a difference in everything we did. And that made my day, right? Yeah. I mean, I was already having a great day because I was speaking at a really great conference, but but then to have someone say that, right? I felt so awesome, right? It was definitely on top of the world at that moment. Well, cool. So I'll start wrapping us up, because funny part is I have another interview at 7, which is it was funny. So for those who don't know, especially for the non-speakers on here, so we opened this up for Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it was unbelievable how quickly all those slots got taken. And then so I opened up more slots, and it's funny. I almost told speakers, "Hey, don't sign up for 2 at the same day," right? Because but then I had a bunch doing. I'm like, all right, this is cool. I just love the enthusiasm. But so I don't, so we're not rushing out, but still we got plenty of time. But with that, I mean, any closing thoughts you have in general?
I'm still terrified about how I'm going to actually make this work from a technology standpoint.
Sure.
I've actually, so I started looking into. There's apparently an app that allows you to use iOS devices as cameras. So I'm thinking I'm probably going to leverage. I've got an iPad and at least one iPhone, unless I steal my son's iPhone, in which I can have 2. And probably going to use Open Broadcast Studio with those devices and probably a couple of webcams. And we'll see how that works. So I'm pretty sure that inside of OBS I can get enough different what do they call them, scenes together to be able to switch from close up of the hot end view to what's on the screen for software stuff to whatever else. So I'm confident that I'll figure it out. It's like, okay, this is new ground for me. I'm very accustomed from all the way back to the Windows Phone days of actually showing devices I actually have a document camera that I've used for that purpose. So like one device at a time, or using, there's actually a software that I use for Android that allows you to directly show the screen and actually manipulate it from your PC. So there's a variety of kind of tricks I've used that way. But I have to decide, first of all, I have to decide whether I want to try to include both printers or just stick with one of the 2 printers. They're both on the same desk, so it's possible I could swap things around relatively easily. But the other trick is, you're probably accustomed to, you probably got a video switcher and things like that if you're doing a lot of streaming. I don't have any of that hardware, so it'll be interesting to see.
Good luck trying to find any of that right now, too.
What's that?
Good luck trying to find any of that right now.
Yeah, well, I'm also I'm somewhat of a hacker, so I also need to look into whether OBS has any APIs. So like, could I write an OutSystems app that would switch my scenes on OBS so I could just use one of my devices as a switcher via software, right? Because that would not only, so it'd be very meta, because what I could do is I could do the 3D printing workshop for the conference, but simultaneously do some how-to videos on how I used OutSystems to control my video rig for the conference for my 3D printing workshop. So you can tell my brain's always looking for like, okay, how can I repurpose this content? Like if I'm going to put this much work into this, what else can I get out of it?
Well, I definitely know that there is APIs because I mean, sitting over here, I've got what's called Stream Deck. Right? I mean, granted, it's a packaged product, but one of the things I can do is I can switch scenes from it, and it's just plugins that you add into the Stream Deck allows it to do that.
So what software is it using ultimately for that? So is it using OBS or is it its own software?
It is using OBS.
Oh, okay.
And sure enough, I mean, now I'm thinking about look up Bar Raider.
Bar Raider?
Bar Raider. So it's someone who writes a lot of plugins for the Elgato Stream Decks. And one of the ones he's written is an advanced OBS controller. Cool. And so the reason why I say that because it's all he's got all his code up on GitHub, so you'll be able to see what how he did that. But
nice.
So when I say I know there's an API, I only know it because I know I'm using some people's stuff that is using it.
Right. Well, if there's an API, I can program an OutSystems app around it.
Exactly. So. Yeah. No, that'd be fun. You get
challenge accepted.
And again, you get more content to talk about, right? It's
exactly.
I mean, I think there's one thing about speaking is trying to figure out, other or writing blogs or what have you, just finding other new content to write about or to speak about,
And sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right itch to scratch.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know I needed that. I need that now.
Big lesson I learned is, when you come up with those ideas, write them down.
Yeah.
Because I've had plenty where, like a week later, I'm like, what was I thinking about doing? I have no idea, right? Exactly. Which is why I mean streaming earlier today and talking about so apparently now in Azure there's actually a listing of all the free services right within the portal, and I'm like, I could do a talk about all the free services in Azure and like use 5 or 6 of them. But I made sure I've got it written down right here on this piece of paper that I keep on my desk. Or all my most recent notes that I wrote.
There you go.
So. Well, great. It was awesome having you here tonight. It's even more awesome. We'll have you at Code PaLOusa. I'm pretty sure this is your first time at Code PaLOusa, right?
It is. It is indeed. Schedule hasn't worked out before, so glad that it works out this year.
Yeah, I'm glad to. Because I've been following you for a long time. Actually, well, sure enough, I remember when you were doing a podcast. I was actually a guest on that podcast. Yeah, and of course the thing I remember the most about that was I bought a new pair of headphones with a microphone, and it kept on making noise the whole time. So I had to get to a point where I wasn't allowed to move my head because you guys kept to a point. Hey Chad, you're making noise again. Hey Chad, you're making noise again. So I found I had to be like this the whole time, not moving my head.
Yeah, those were the days, and wow. Dane and I, when we started that podcast, we actually. Many times we would actually take that podcast on the road. So I actually still have the recorder that I bought for that purpose, but I had like a 8-channel digital recorder, and I packed that up with mics and headphones and whatnot. And we took that on the road to Richmond Code Camp. I think we did some recording at the CMAP Code Camp a couple of times. So that was great fun. It is, one of the things about podcasting though is that I really admire the people who are able to sustain the pace because it's a lot of work, right? There's a lot of work that goes into coming with the guests, with, just kind of the energy that you put into the podcast, the production of it, editing, places to host it. So you look at folks like Carl and Richard from .NET Rocks. You look at I'm still a regular listener to Windows Weekly. They've been going hundreds of episodes. I mean, it really is, it's impressive when you see the effort that goes into it from, the behind the host chair, if you will. It just makes you appreciate all the more those folks who are able to sustain a podcast over the long term. Oh, yeah. But I'm certainly glad we had the opportunity to have you on. I'm glad it was another one of those things that I just really enjoyed about my career at Microsoft was being given the opportunity to participate in things like that. And, the support that I got from within Microsoft for, it's like, if you've got a great idea, run with it, right? And helping community members tell their stories, I think was, that's something I'm very proud of in terms of that time, that period in my career. So thank you for that.
No, like I said, it was a blast doing it, other than I couldn't move my head, right?
Technology will kill us sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Awesome. Well, again, I really do appreciate you joining us, and look forward to, of course, I don't really get to sit in many sessions. Hopefully this time I'll have more chances, since it's not like I have to run around a conference space, like a convention center or what have you, to make sure everything's running smoothly.
I think you'll still have some logistics to worry about, but hey, you'll have recordings you can catch up on.
We'll have recordings. Yeah, exactly. And interesting, we're going to have a command center. So my team will actually be in one really big room, so we can still do social spacing, but hopefully that'll help things out.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Again,
thanks for